Okay, let's jump in and get started. So welcome everyone to SAVE's Miami-Dade County State Attorney Candidate Forum. My name is Orlando Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of SAVE, Safeguarding American Values for Everyone. My pronouns are he, him, and his. SAVE's mission is to promote, protect, and defend equality for people in South Florida who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Today is our second State Attorney Candidate Forum. Both candidates that are running for the office include the invitation to be a part of the forum. Miami-Dade County includes a population of nearly 3 million residents, of which half are registered to vote. One of the ways that SAVE does its work is that we engage both candidates and voters to better serve the LGBT community. We're excited to put together these sessions to support how you can make an informed decision when choosing which candidate you're going to be voting for. The election for the Miami-Dade State Attorney is this August the 18th. In addition to these forums, the SAVE Action Pack will invite both of the candidates to participate in our endorsement process. The candidates that wish to receive an endorsement will respond to the questionnaire that we send them. There, they will be able to share their policy positions on various issues that affect the LGBT community. Following the completion of the questionnaire, each candidate will then be interviewed by a panel comprised of community members who will vote to endorse or not. This is a very important election year, and I encourage you to have a plan for how you will make sure that we get pro-equality candidates elected. First of all, of course, we need you to register to vote. And second, we need you to be sure that you sign up to vote by mail. It's legal, it's safe, and it's easy. The public health condition that we're currently dealing with necessitates us to be socially distant. So you need to make sure that you take this step to be able to vote by mail. And you need to do that at least 10 days before the election. I want to be really clear. A lot of people think that when they register to vote, that they're also already signing up to vote by mail. They're two different steps. Make sure you do both of them. I also want to encourage you to be involved with SAVE through our endorsement panels. Through the panels, you will have an opportunity to interview candidates and vote to endorse. Lastly, I want to remind you that the work of SAVE is primarily supported by individual donors. I urge you to become a member at SAVE.LGBT/membership. Our memberships start as low as $35 per year. Your support will allow us to continue to do our work to get pro-equality candidates elected. Today's forum will include a 15-minute presentation by incumbent Miami-Dade County State Attorney Katherine Fernandez Rundle. Following the presentation, we will take questions from the public. Just remember that all of the attendees that are on this webinar are muted except for the three presenters. We will take questions by having you post to the Q&A function in the toolbar of your Zoom screen. I advise that you please be succinct in submitting your question. If you've joined us by Facebook Live, you can only listen in on the conversation. So in order to submit questions, join the discussion through Zoom. Joining me for the Q&A session is Sergio Molina. He is a SAVE volunteer and a third-year law student at Nova Southeastern University's Shepherd Broad College of Law. Welcome, Ms. Fernandez and Mr. Molina. We can have you both. So let's get started. State Attorney Fernandez Rundle, thank you for being with us tonight. I hope that you and your family are doing well. I'm going to hand over the floor over to you for 15 minutes. Sergio and I are going to turn off our video cameras. We're going to go away. And then what we'll do is that when there's 3 minutes left, we'll turn our cameras back on so that you know it's time to wind down. That a deal?
Great.
Awesome. The floor is yours.
Well, happy Pride. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I want to congratulate everyone on a great victory by the U.S. Supreme Court this week. Still have a long way to go to reach full equality, but it's a really strong step in the right direction. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about your state attorney's office, who we are, what some of our accomplishments are, and then I'm going to go on to talk about what we have done and are doing for the LGBTQ community. I'm going to leave some of the issues, the big issues, on police relations, on police shootings, investigations, and charges, and those kinds of things to the questions I'm sure that I'm going to be receiving shortly. So let me start by telling you that your state attorney's office is one of the largest in the United States. We're in 9 buildings. We have 1,200 employees. We have over 300 lawyers and support staff of 800. Every year, we handle approximately 24,000 felonies, nearly 3,000 juvenile arrests, and over 27,000 misdemeanors overall are handled every year. And just to give you an example, just the intake, the filing of most of our felony cases are 16 to 18,000 a year. So you can see that that's the volume is quite large. Now, another thing that we do that's distinctive from any other state attorney's office in Florida is we are the only office that handles child support enforcement. And we do that because we see it as a form of child prevention, crime prevention for children. Last year, we had approximately 80,000 cases. We collected around $182 million. And just in the last 7 years, it's over $1 billion in judgment just in the last 7 years. Our budget is approximately $64 million for the prosecution side and about $25,000 for the child support enforcement side. Now, let me tell you a little bit of our accomplishments. Our strategies since I became state attorney have resulted in a 70% decrease in a crime rate. But what's significant about that, other than its public safety is much better, is we did so with dramatically reducing our reliance on incarceration. So we've really made the case for the rest of the country that mass incarceration is not the answer. It's not the full answer to everything. That's why they refer to us as the Miami-style smart justice. We also have created many pre-arrest and post-arrest diversion programs for juveniles, for adults, both felons and misdemeanors. So we start with pre-arrest. We help create the civil citation program. And since that started, over 60,000 adults and juveniles have been cited instead of arrested and triggered into the entire criminal justice system. We also have diversion if you do get arrested and you're in the system. For those that qualify, mostly nonviolent offenders, we have created a number of post-arrest diversion programs. We have, like, for instance, for our nonviolent, mostly nonviolent, again, important to note, but 2019, we sent over 1,000 juveniles into diversion, 6,000 misdemeanors into diversion, and 1,600 adults into diversion. So you can see that's a large number, almost 8,000 or more that were diverted out of the system. What that means is when they finish their 3-6 month program, we drop the charges and then they can seal and expunge those records, which leads me to another program that we started we're very proud of. We call it Second Chance Program. And what that does is we really believe that if you can get your record sealed or expunged, it relieves that stigma and the collateral consequences that follow folks, unfortunately, throughout their life. So we've done this since, I think, 2011, and we go around the community once a month for several hours. It's a community event, hundreds of people come, and we do everything we can in a one-stop shop, working with all our partners. And during that time, we have assisted over 7,000 folks. The other thing that I just want to talk about accomplishments is therapeutic courts. Our circuit, our judicial circuit, we're so collaborative, and we have created all these alternative pathways to treatment and to programs, to rehabilitation, to restorative justice, through our diversion program, but also through our therapeutic courts, our drug court, our mental health court, our veterans court. So now let me tell you a little bit about what our office has done for the LGBTQ community. So one of the things that what we have done and are doing, so way back when the HIV infection rate was very high, we worked with Dr. Hansel Tooks, one of my favorite people in the world, and worked with him at getting to zero tolerance. And because that task force that he created, he really showed us how this was really impacting in a negative way the LGBTQ community. The other thing he did is he talked me into creating amnesty for just Dade County. We worked with Hansel and Senator Garcia to work on decriminalizing the failure to disclose an HIV infection. We also supported Dr. Tooks in his needle exchange program. We've done that for years, and we will continue to do that. On the legislative side, we advocated for the last 3 or 4 years, I believe it was Senate Bill 940, for gender identity to become part of the hate crimes statute, which it is not, and it still is not, but we will continue to do that. Another thing we're very proud of is the work of Professor Basicki at FIU. I'm not being disrespectful. He always tells everybody, don't try to pronounce my last name. But we partnered with him several years ago. He asked us if we would, and we went in on a grant and we supported it. And we've opened up all of our files. In fact, SAVE, you have been tremendous in locating a lot of victims for this research project. And the whole point of this research project was to really identify the problem of underreporting of hate crimes by the Hispanic LGBTQ community. We also have a hate crimes unit. I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's got 10 senior lawyers. We have a chief and a deputy chief of that unit of 10 lawyers that are both fabulous, veteran, great prosecutors that are gay. They investigate, they prosecute, they charge, they take to trial, they train people in the community. They're on call 24/7 to handle all cases related to hate crimes. For instance, last year in 2019, they had 19 cases. Some of them went to trial, mostly the ones that were anti-Semitic, the ones you may have read about that were anti-Semitic on Miami Beach. I will also say that the chief of that division received a beautiful award last year from the Anti-Defamation League for his work in this field. Couple of cases that might be noteworthy. I don't know if you're familiar, I know that you are, with the Brickell Bridge that happened during the hands down, bikes up. There were a lot of racial slurs that were thrown around during some of the attacks. So that was on MLK Day. We do have charges coming. We're sort of in a slow pause because of COVID, but we intend to file charges. We also have the gay pride incident on Miami Beach in 2018, the couple that was beaten. It is a 4 co-defendant case with 4 different attorneys. It took some time to get it through depositions and so on and so forth. It was set for trial this May, I think May 1st, and then COVID hit. So as soon as we can get up and running, we have every intention to move forward with that. And then we also have the Kinton Moss case. I think most of you are familiar. That was the couple that was senselessly beaten in the city of Miami Park. And it was about 30 days ago. And we are filing charges, a hate crimes case. Again, the paperwork is there, but we've sort of been in a large pause during COVID. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, some of the projects, community projects, our gun violence unit is something really out of the box. I don't know anyone that else has done it. I'm told that it's one of a kind. What we did was we went where the gun violence, the homicides, the contact shootings were occurring in our community. And we took a team from our office and we embedded them in Miami Gardens, in Northside, which is the Liberty City area, and the North District area of the city of Miami. And we have prosecutors there, victims advocates, case analysts, and I hired some former homicide detectives. And the concept is that they stay out there on the scene at night, getting information while it's fresh. And the preliminary research is showing us that we have not had to drop one single one of the cases that we used to have to drop because of witness cooperation or lack of statements or lack of evidence. So that's a project we're very, very proud of. And then last but not least is our sex trafficking unit. Florida was ranked 2nd in the United States with the number of victims of human trafficking, and we didn't have anything in place for our community. Of course, Miami-Dade was number 1 in Florida. So in the last 6, 7, 8 years, we have created an incredible infrastructure around the victims of this trauma, of sex trafficking, of sexual exploitation of our children and our youth. And it's become a model for the country. And we now just opened about 17 months ago, the first that I'm aware of its kind human trafficking center here in our community. So with that, I could go on about so many other accomplishments, but I want to make sure that I leave time for questions and answers, or I can just continue to talk about some of our other accomplishments. Okay, so should I keep going, Orlando?
No, you're good. You had a couple, you had like a minute and a half left, so you made good use of time. And
Okay,
we've got questions that are already coming through from the
okay.
public, and we're going to take those one at a time. But first, we're going to go to Sergio, who's going to start us off and kick us off with the first question.
Good evening, Ms. Fernandez Rundle. As Orlando mentioned, my name is Sergio Molina, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. So this evening, I will start with a brief introduction to each issue prior to asking each question. I'm sure that our audience is looking forward to an informative discussion, so I'm going to jump right in. Just 3 days ago, we witnessed the latest victory in the LGBTQ rights movement, as you had mentioned, a movement that historians recognize as having ties that bound it to the Black freedom movement. Given the intersectional history of the LGBTQ community, addressing systemic racism and racial disparities is indivisibly part of our battle for equal rights. The recent protests against police brutality have highlighted both a national and a local culture of police violence and misconduct. What kind of responsibility or role do you think the state attorney should play in police transgressions and the perpetuation of these behaviors?
Thank you. It really has been an incredible time in our history to witness what is occurring, and it's been very painful to watch so many people grieving and to feel their pain, and we all share in that pain. And it's been a real awakening for all of us in America, our community, and all across America, and even across the globe. If you think about how Black Lives Matters has really made a difference in the consciousness of all of us, it's really profound. And so I see it in a couple of ways. I see it as a real opportunity for us as a humanity to embrace this issue, deal with it, talk about it. Sometimes it's really hard to talk about the racial and ethnic disparities and inequalities that exist in all parts of our society and our systems and our infrastructure and our service provider system and our criminal justice system. And so this, I think, is a real time, a real opportunity where we can, working together, really bring about some reforms. So having said that, is a general umbrella about how we feel at the office, all of us. We think and we believe that the state attorney's office has many different roles. So one is we do prosecute police for violating the law. We've always felt that they and correctional officers are not above the law. And since I've been there, we have prosecuted over 500 police and correctional officers. So some of the misconception that that's not happening is just unfortunate, a misconception. Now that doesn't mean that they're all being prosecuted for misconduct. Whatever crime they commit, they're going to be held accountable for it, whether it's stealing or planting drugs on the scene or it's domestic violence, whatever it may be. If the evidence is there and the law is there, they're going to be prosecuted. Now, the other thing is that I think we also play a major role in a lot of the abuse cases that we see. And traditionally, we didn't always have the evidence, right? I was really a big proponent of body-worn cameras for a bunch of reasons, but the primary reason is we want to know the truth of what happened. What happened in that interaction? Because before, sometimes it's a he said, she said, and you didn't have any evidence of what happened. So now, as you can see, we have more technologies. Everyone has a camera. Buildings have security cameras. The officers have cameras. Their cars have dash cameras. So that's really changed a lot in enabling us to increase our prosecutions. And so I just want to give a couple that are recent, right, that may spring to mind. So I think you all may remember the Jonathan Alita case. The Jonathan Alita case was the North Miami police officer who shot at an autistic boy that was sitting in the street, and his caretaker, Mr. Kinsey, was down on the ground with his hands out so they could be seen. And Officer Alita took a shot at the autistic boy and instead hit Mr. Kinsey. We had the ability to get a lot of information from a lot of different angles. And so we did. We filed charges, we prosecuted him, we took him to trial. We got a not guilty on some of the charges, and on some of them they were a hung jury. We needed to make a decision. And of course, the defense came to us and said, you know, let's see if we can do something instead of retrying this case. And we said, no, we're going to go to trial. We retried the case. And this time the jury did come back, not on the higher penalty, but on a misdemeanor of culpable negligence. But at least we did get that. And so I say that one so that everyone's, oh, yes, that's right, there's that case. And then just a couple other cases. We had the case involving Officer Bunnenblust. He was a City of Miami officer. And he was the one you may have seen where he slammed an administrator over at Jackson Memorial Hospital, I believe, and just slammed him his head right into the ground. Completely unjustified and completely inappropriate. And it was wrong and it was a crime. And we prosecuted him. And he was convicted, and he did get local jail. He went to jail. We also had the case of Officer Acosta, City of Miami police officer, he was pulling over in his uniform, in his police car, his patrol car, full uniform, and he would pull over. He was targeting people of color and people who he believed were illegal immigrants, or at least had some concern about their immigration status. And he did that because he didn't think that he would be reported. And so he would just steal from them. We prosecuted him, and he got 6 years of state prison. I don't know if you remember Officer Rosario, the Miami-Dade police detective who was prosecuted for stealing expensive jewelry. He'd go to a crime scene, someone would report jewelry stolen. He would take the jewelry. Well, he was caught over at the Seabolt building. And of course, we had cameras from inside the store. And he was prosecuted and convicted him of trafficking in stolen property. And he was sentenced to state prison. And the list sort of goes on, but you remember Officer Coolian on Miami Beach? He was the one that he was prosecuted for the Miami Beach police officer for running over, I think, a number of people on his ATV showing off. We did prosecute him as well for reckless driving, and he was sentenced to state prison. So those are just some examples of the cases that we have prosecuted for misconduct and crimes that are committed by officers during the course of duty. We have other cases that are pending now. We are prosecuting Officer Lester Brown, who's a Homestead police officer who he pushed, if you can imagine, a handcuffed man. He's inside the police station. He's not going anywhere. He's completely secure. And for no reason, he just pushes the man's head into the wall of the police station. So that case is pending now. We also have one, I think, had some notoriety. It was there were two women down south, and they walked by someone who had a gun on his porch. They are the ones that called the police. They said, we're the victims of a crime. The police went out to the scene. They were very abusive to these two girls. And then they actually took one of the women and threw her down to the ground. And we believe assaulted her in that takedown with his firearm. So those are cases that are pending. Now, I must tell you, we're not always successful. Juries do not always convict on these kinds of cases. Even, these are not even excessive use of force. I haven't even gotten to those yet, right? These are just like, for instance, we prosecuted a sergeant. This is for excessive use, not deadly excessive use of force, but we prosecuted him for a misdemeanor battery. There was a teenager that was handcuffed, and he just kicked him for no reason. And so we took that to trial, but the jury acquitted him. We had another case where we prosecuted a City of Miami police officer. You may have seen this. He was down on the ground, handcuffed, face down, hands behind, handcuffed. And an officer just comes and kicks the suspect, who was lying on the ground. It was in Overtown. You may have seen it. It was captured. And we prosecuted him, and the judge threw it out. It didn't even let it get to a jury. So I'm just giving you some examples of some of the challenges as we face. And I would call to your attention, there was an article, I don't know if you remember this, in February, I think you can see this on the screen, but in February, essentially, it was by David Avaya, a very recognized and reputable, very good reporter. And he says prosecutors are charging South Florida cops for rough arrests, but juries keep acquitting them. And so that was the whole article about how juries feel. And it's not just our juries here in Dade County, by the way. That's pretty much the way it is around the state of Florida, and it's around the country. And there's all kinds of studies that support that. I don't know if you want me to address use of deadly force, or if someone is at another.
Let's look at some of the questions that we've got. And I appreciate that you enumerated so many of the cases that are there. You can imagine that given the current times and the headlines, that there are a lot of questions that we're getting about prosecuting police officers. But I won't go into the details of the one that's here. I think it presents a little dynamic in a wrinkle. But what it says is, it's asking for you to comment on a Hialeah Police Department officer, Officer Jesus Manopal. And so in this situation, 4 women made criminal accusations upon the decision not to prosecute multiple allegations. Then the FBI came in and made an arrest. And so in this situation, we have something didn't happen on your side of the office, but then the FBI came in and was able to pick up on where things were left off.
Yeah, the Sergeant Menacall case is really a regrettable outcome for our office. And but two things I would say is that we sent that to the Department of Justice. I want to say in 2015. It was an older case, and fortunately, like us, December 6 months ago, they did file civil rights charges. So that's the good news. What I learned about that case is that we really needed to tighten up within the office some things. So I changed the policy based on what happened in that case. And from now on, what happens is police officers go into our public corruption unit for investigation. And that's where this case started. And so it was being looked at those eyes. From now on, if it involves sexual assault or potential sexual exploitation, that's going to be now has to be viewed by our sexual assault specialist, that we have a specialized unit, and it's going to go to our human trafficking unit so that we have more eyes on those kinds of cases so that doesn't happen again. Also, we've hired software. We're in the process of getting it, I should say, purchasing software. It's going to be a much better case management system really for our sex trafficking center. But I don't want anyone to leave with the inference that we did not prosecute him because we don't prosecute those kinds of cases. We do. I emphatically assure you that we do. And let me just give you 2 examples of very similarly situated cases. One involved Michael Raguso. We prosecuted Raguso for sexual battery and kidnapping. He eventually pled guilty and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. We also had Paul Broski, Officer Broski. We prosecuted him for sexual battery and armed kidnapping. And we took him to a jury and they found him guilty and he was sentenced to 50 years in state prison. So I hope that answers that question about how strongly we feel about those kinds of cases.
That's helpful. So Sergio, we're going to turn over to you now.
I'd like to expand on our discussion of just systemic disparities. You had mentioned the prevalence of HIV in the LGBTQ community. So I'd like to turn to some of the discriminatory laws that impact the LGBTQ community, such as the LGBTQ panic defense and HIV criminalization statutes, to name a few. For those in the audience that might not be aware, the HIV exposure laws impose or heighten criminal liability when HIV positive people do not disclose their HIV status to sexual partners. In Florida, this is true even in situations where there is no actual transmission or even the possibility of transmission. And empirical data suggests that these HIV criminalization statutes actually disincentivize testing and disproportionately impact the Black community. That said, what do you think the role of the state attorney is in confronting the laws that discriminate against the LGBTQ community, and whether it is your job to enforce such laws regardless of their detrimental impacts?
Thank you, Sergio. And I obviously I glossed over that too quickly in my introduction. So let me go back to that, because that's one of the things that Dr. Hansel Tooks and I worked on. I completely support wholeheartedly and advocated up in Tallahassee for the decriminalization for the very reason that you said. It just discourages folks from getting tested, which keeps them more marginalized and keeps them at risk. And as you said, it is true that the LGBT community is what's impacted, and our Black and Brown family members of our humanity are greatly impacted by that. So I support it. I always have. I will continue to do that. And you can count on me to do that. I think I may have mentioned also, if you talk about other laws, is we really need to get the gender identity into the law more. It's just that whole trans population is not being protected. We had a horrible murder case of a transgender person who was actually handled by my office. And it's just a population we've seen recently. I think there's been an increase in a couple of murders. Tragic. It's horrible what we're seeing. And so, yeah, I'm all with you on those issues. And I have a history of it. I'm not just talking about it. I have a record of doing it. I will continue to do that. Yes, you can count on me.
We're going to turn over to the topic of human trafficking. And this is a question by our friend Basiki. And so the question is, what have you learned from your office's human trafficking work, especially in terms of identifying trafficking cases that you can use to better flag hate crimes against LGBT victims?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Basiki, Professor. I don't know if he's on here, but, virtual hugs to you. So on human trafficking, let me just real quick say, it was about a couple of years ago that Florida ranked #2 in the United States in the number of victims of human trafficking. And we really didn't understand it. What we thought it was not. And that began the journey to try to understand, who are these victims? Who are they and where are they? And what we discovered as we built this infrastructure, we changed the laws. We had to make a trauma base for the victims. We learned that it's mostly our children. About 40% of the victim population are under the age of 18, and the other population is from 18 to 24. So they're all, our children and our youth that are the targets. It's a $132 billion a year industry. And that's why this is not about sex, it's about selling our children for money. So what we have learned also is there are kids, there are in our schools and our parks, they're in our foster care system, a large number of them are throwaways, runaways, folks that don't want them. We've also learned, we've been working a lot with our LGBT community service providers like Francesco at Survivors Pathways, because we do know that the male population, although it's small, the homosexual, it's a smaller group, we have an issue. And we know we need to address that. We've all been talking about it as a center, as a very solidified, collaborative group that we have prosecuted over, think about this, we prosecuted over 600 cases, criminal cases in that short period of time, by far more than any other office in America, including the federal offices. And we've touched over 700 victims. We were the model, and that's why the NFL came to us when the Super Bowl came here. And we're also going to be the model that they look to, and they've asked us to help them in Tampa, in the Tampa area, come this next February, or I think it's in February or March. So for those of you in the community, you can help me and help us really build something special for the trans population. Although the shelter that we have at Project Phoenix, they will take a trans person, but we still haven't identified how we can best work with our victims, the homosexual part of those victimizations. So that would be something that I would really look forward to you being my partners and helping me with. And I think Basiki is going to give us a lot of answers about why is it that so many Hispanic victims don't report it, of the LGBT community. Why is that? And so that's one of the things I'm so looking forward to. And I really welcomed it. It was like such a godsend when Basiki came and said, will you help us? I said, oh my goodness, that'd be wonderful. Because until we understand the fear or the stigma or the trauma that they feel and they feel they have to overcome, we're not going to be able to reach them. So that research that Professor Basiki is doing will be invaluable to all of us in this mission that we have fighting human trafficking in our community.
Sergio, go ahead with the next question.
Ms. Fernandez Rundle, you mentioned youth interacting with the criminal justice system, both as offenders and as victims. So I'd like to discuss the risks faced by some of our more vulnerable populations within the LGBTQ community, particularly LGBTQ youth. It's been widely acknowledged that children are at a heightened risk for bullying, suicidal thoughts, and suicide attempts. One study found that almost 1/2 of LGB students had seriously considered suicide, with about 1/3 reporting being bullied at school. Similarly, 1/3 of trans students reported suicide attempts over the course of a year. With that in mind, what can your office do to protect LGBTQ youth from harmful bullying in schools?
Thanks, Sergio. We have been very involved in the juvenile justice system. And in fact, we really lead, again, in many ways. And one of the ways that we do is in the sort of diversion programs, the pathways that we've created. I talked a little bit about the civil citation, right? That's to try to keep them from being arrested. And that, sounds like I'm bragging, but in 2007, we came up with that legislation that created the civil citation so that police officers during that zero tolerance, do you remember that? Oh, you're probably too young. But during that zero tolerance, we were arresting all these children. And it wasn't serving anybody. And oftentimes it was just a reaction to bullying or protecting themselves. So we created, as an option to being arrested, to not being arrested, the citations. Those have helped a lot keep them out. For those of them that come in, we do a couple of things. We have diversion programs upon diversion programs, trying to get them into pathways and programs where we can address some of their underlying problems, some of their needs. What are they suffering in school? And we staff a lot of those cases. We have excellent service providers that we work with in the community. We have an excellent juvenile assessment center that works with us. We actually go into the schools and we work with the schools. We have all kinds of programs. We do the SMART program. We do an anti-bullying program with the schools, with the schools, the superintendent and the teachers. And so we really think a lot of that is important for us. And on that note, I know this issue of direct file and mandatory files, I know it doesn't directly answer your question, Sergio, but since we're on juvenile justice, we as an office probably have the lowest per capita rate of transferring juveniles into the adult system, right? For adult court, but you can get juvenile sanctions. A lot of judges do that. And we were in favor of, and I believe I was the only state attorney amongst my colleagues in the state that supported the repeal of mandatory and discretionary, I'm going to put it that way, discretionary transfers. And just to give you an example, in 2019, I think they go by year 2018-19, there were approximately 50 out of the 3,000 that we talked about, which is a very low percentage. That's why I say we're one of the lowest percentages in the state, went to the adult courts. And that doesn't mean they get an adult sanction, by the way. They can still get juvenile sanctions. They can still get youthful offender sentences. But what it does mean is that of those 50, the overwhelming majority were mandated by law. So it's not discretionary. And I think that was like 44 of them. And then there was like a remaining 16 where we did have to make a tough decision. But it's tough decisions like the shooters of little Carter. And if you remember King Carter, two of the killers were under the age of 18. And so, yes, we are going to take a very assertive role on youth that are violent and that kill or hurt or rob others or rape others. We do take a very strong position on those. But as you can see by the numbers, they're very far and few between. And finally, on that note, even having said that, the state legislature did not repeal the discretionary direct file that I was telling you about, the transfers. So I went to our local chief judge of juvenile division, fabulous jurist, Orlando Prescott, went to the public defender, Carlos Martinez, a great public defender, and said, why don't we try a pilot? Let's see about asking the courts to make the decision on whether or not to transfer the juveniles. So we're trying that now. And the concept is that I supported it if there were enough resources for the courts and the DJJ system to handle them in the juvenile system. And so this pilot should tell us what resources the courts need, what resources Carlos need, do we need, does DJJ need to be able to actually repeal that discretionary direct file.
Thank you. I just want to follow up briefly. In your professional opinion, where does accountability lie then when a child is bullied on the basis of their sexuality or gender identity, and that bullying ultimately results in bodily harm, death, or suicide?
You know what? It falls on all of us. We're all responsible for that. We all have to recognize, first of all, that it exists. We have to acknowledge it. We have to embrace it. And we have to fight it and say that it's intolerable at all levels. It breaks my heart to see that. I know a lot of people who share their stories, a lot of mothers that share their stories, and a lot of the defendants that they started out because they were being bullied, and sometimes they were just trying to protect themselves. So all of us have to recognize that, this is a problem, and we have to take a really hard stance about it. It's in our schools, it's in our neighborhoods, it's in our homes. It begins with teaching. When we see it on any kind of, on the technology today, every single parent has to be mindful of what their children are doing and what they're watching. And a lot of adults will ask me, well, my son or daughter, they won't let me see what they're doing on their cell phone. It's their phone. No. That phone, you're the adult in that household. That phone belongs to you. You have not only, I don't think the right, I think you have the obligation to look and see, are they bullying or are they being bullied? Because that's the only way we're going to have meaningful intervention to try to put an end to this, so we don't have these tragic outcomes, right? So I say it's all of us, and we have to do more education, we have to do more training, more awareness, more responsibility. We have to all accept responsibility for it. And I think we've got to do it fairly quickly because, as you pointed out, Sergio, the numbers are only increasing. And a lot of it has to do with this technology. It seems very secret, it's very private, and we're not really watching what's happening with our youth, and we've got to be more diligent.
So the next question is going to be sort of two parts, because I think I'm kind of combining some questions to help be a little efficient. So what we have is a broad question and then one that's more specific. So the broad question is about how your office has adapted during the coronavirus lockdown and shelter in place. But then the question here that's specific to the population is, it says, can you tell us what it is that you're ensuring that intimate partner victims have access to service when they're not safe at home? And so I think that, we're talking about victims of domestic abuse, but also children who might be victims of abuse. Now that everybody's having to stay at home, it's almost like they're incarcerated in a nightmare scenario. So I sort of combined both questions, but it addresses the coronavirus shelter in place.
So that's, whoever asked that question is very intuitive, because let me start real quick with what we had to do. So you remember at the beginning of this wonderful dialogue we were having, we talked about the volume, right? So we had 9 buildings, 1,200 employees. We had to send them all home and start to get them working remotely. It was amazing to pivot our operations just like that. And when that stay away home, the courts were closed by the Florida Supreme Court. We were not permitted, except for mission critical people, to come. We had cases that were in the process. We set up kiosks so that we can take information long distance. We sent everybody home. We got cell phones to everybody so that all our phone calls would roll over. I mean, it was just incredible. The good news is that now that we're doing a lot of things remote, remember I told you about the filing of cases? That's when we set up appointments and we would meet with police officers, meet with civilians, gather the evidence, the paper evidence, the documents, the support reports, all that stuff was paper. And we'd have a file and we'd file it with the clerk and that would start a criminal case. Well, we'd wanted to go paperless for years. And then this opportunity was thrown upon us. But the good news is we still filed those cases. And we now, I think I mentioned to you, it's like 15 to 18,000 cases that is now all being done paperless. And the interesting thing is that we're noticing that the filing rate is going up. So our civilian witnesses, our police officers are actually cooperating a lot more. Now that they can just go on to some machine in their home, right? Use modern technology, we're now able to take statements from them. So those cases are being filed. Remember I talked to you a little bit about the child support enforcement? If you can imagine, stay at home, everyone's worried about, are they losing their jobs? Where's the economy going? Am I going to be part of the stimulus package? And so we knew the calls from the families. Remember those 80,000 families I mentioned to you? Well, the 80,000 cases are children, but in any event, all those families were going to want to know what was going to happen to them. Our 25 specialists that respond to phone calls all went remote again. And since COVID to last Friday, have managed to handle over 33,000 phone calls. So just a taste of sort of the pivot we had to do. We haven't gone, we have some courtrooms that are virtual. I was very lucky that we had stockpile of some laptops and cameras. So we gave 135 of those laptops and cameras to our courts. So our partners in the court system could go virtual with us. We took approximately 30 of those same things and gave it to the jails. So they didn't have to transport inmates over to the courthouse so we could go virtual with them. So that's just a taste of what we had to do. But let me tell you about the issue that you raised, Sergio, about stay at home. We were very concerned, truly, very intuitive, whoever asked that question, because normally our experience when we have a crisis like a hurricane or 9/11, anxiety is high, families are stressed, and that's when they start to use alcohol and drugs, and it results in violent acts in the house. We were ready for this increase when COVID hit. Unfortunately, that's not what we saw. We saw a series of our arrests dropped. And the last one, as of May, we had a 24% decrease. It hasn't been every month at that level, but last month was 24. So it's been a consistent decrease, 16%, 20% last month, 24% drop in arrests. And then we found from the courts, the chief judge of the domestic violence court called me, and she was concerned because the requests for protective orders had decreased instead of increased. And then when I spoke to the head of shelters for our community, she said, no, we have full capacity, they're not coming. So here's what we learned. We learned that a lot of our victims were staying at home and feeling trapped, or at least that was our concern, feeling trapped in an abusive situation. We didn't want them to have to choose between COVID and an abusive partner. So we went to the county commission, we started a campaign awareness on saying our courts are open, you can get protection orders, your state attorney's office is open, the police will arrest, and our domestic violence shelters, they're all CDC compliant. So please feel free, and they are, by the way. They've even done it in such a way there's no communal eating, we have capacity. And then you mentioned also the children. We were very worried because we don't have all the eyes that we would normally have in schools, in daycares, and day camps. So, where children have an outlet, we have all those eyes and ears that can spot any kind of neglect or abuse. So we are very aware that these are issues, that hopefully this campaign, it's up and running. We started about 2 weeks ago, and we hope that we can get that message out. You can help us as well to get that message out. SAVE has an incredible network. I mean, I don't know anybody that networks better than you do and is more aggressive in advocacy than SAVE. So that would be really something great that you can do with us.
Thank you. Sergio's next.
I'd like to focus now on violence against the trans community and the trans community itself. Trans people today face an epidemic of anti-trans violence. This is a far more prevalent experience for Black and brown trans individuals. 2020 has already seen at least 16 deaths of trans or gender nonconforming people due to fatal violence, a number that has had to be updated at least 3 times just this week. As a public official that represents one of Florida's most diverse counties, how have you made yourself available to members of the trans community who might be fearful of interacting with law enforcement and the criminal justice system?
Excellent question, Sergio, because going back to the hate crimes unit, so we, along with you all as well, I mean, I think we were at your, what was it, your Florida Forward Expo that you had, and SAVE was one of the presenters, I was one of the presenters, and this was one of the issues that we all talked about. But that hate crimes unit that I told you about, a very important piece that they do, yes, the prosecution's important, and yes, the responding to the scene 24/7 is extremely valuable and important. I don't know other state attorneys that they do that. But what the other thing they do that's so important is they liaison with, so for instance, the Miami Beach Police Department has a LGBTQ liaison. And so our job is to liaison with them and talk about what is available, what services, what the police need to be looking for. We do that with the city of Miami Beach, with the city of Miami, and all the other police departments, because the training for those first responders, the police officer, so the first thing you have to do is you have to make the trans population, the whole LGBT community, believe and trust, right? There has to be a trust that there's going to be a response from us, from the police, who are going to respond on the scene, that they're going to believe them, that they're going to take action, and that eventually our officers, remember I told you 24/7 with those police officers, that we are going to take aggressive and assertive action and hold somebody accountable for that. And so we're out there all the time trying to communicate with the public, with that community, with your community, with our bigger community. Everyone needs to know that we are available, and we're trying to teach and create awareness. And like I said, the other thing is we really have to advocate to include gender identity, because that is really what's lacking now. And you know, they need to feel and believe and be recognized as a protected population. You know, yes, we're going to prosecute, like I told you, we prosecuted the murder a couple of years ago, or several years ago, a horrific murder of a transgender. And it was just, they're gruesome, and to see it increasing is also, it's alarming. But I do believe that we all have a role. I believe that we are very aware of our role. If you think of other things that we should be doing, you know, we're certainly not perfect. We may think we have it covered, and maybe we don't. Maybe there's something else that we need to do that's more helpful, more informative, more assertive, more aggressive, more impactful, all those things, then, you know, we're going to do it. So just let us know whatever else we can do. And I know that the head of that division, the hate crimes unit, Justin Funk is his name, and I know he doesn't mind my saying so. I'm so proud of him. He's listening to this. So I know he's going like this. That's right. We'll do whatever we can. We're doing whatever we can, and we'll continue to do whatever we can.
We always enjoy working with Justin. It's been a really wonderful thing to have a great working relationship. You know, many times we are the intake of so many cases that come in, and it's really great to be able to immediately work with some of the victims that experience violence and connect them immediately with your office. So let's touch on, of course, a very controversial case. You had mentioned earlier the couple that was attacked by 4 men in April in 2018 during Miami Pride. When the courts are back open in full operation, what priority does this case have to be brought to court?
You know, honestly, Orlando, this is such a priority for us. And I know it's very frustrating because it has taken a long time. And Justin and I talk a lot about it because Justin actually has that case. And I think you're familiar with that, Orlando. I think we've talked a lot about this case. We've met with you, and we've met with, I think, your chair, and we've talked about this case. It is a priority case for us. And I hope you know that and believe that. And, you know, he's worked tirelessly on it. Part of the issues, okay, is you had 4 co-defendants and they all were represented by 1 lawyer. Well, that's not possible. So then we had to wait for the 4 co-defendants to each get their own lawyer. Now you have 4 lawyers that are involved. I know this was a 2018 case, and I know that, you know, it was during Pride Month. And so, you know, just it's, you know, it's time, right? We were ready to go to trial. Getting the depositions of 4 attorneys and all the victims and everybody together has been, I'm not trying to make excuses. This is just the world that we live in. And it's been, you know, complicated. Justin can be all over it and he can force them and cajole them and get this going, everything you want. But if those defense attorneys don't set it down and don't move, and the judges don't, you know, prod them to do it, it does languish a bit. Having said that, we had everything sort of on track. We had the case set to go to trial, which is a good thing, right? It's date certain was set. I want to say, I think Justin told me it was going to be May 1st. And then, you know what happened, or maybe it was April 1st, but look what happened. COVID. And so COVID has put the entire criminal justice system on hold. So we're in a huge pause. We anticipated this to be a jury trial. So I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I don't know when we're going to get jury trials back. That's the big question mark that all of us in the system are talking about at the federal level, at the state level, at the civil level, and the criminal courts level. Now, the criminal courts are a priority because the cases we deal with have such incredible constitutional safeguards, right? We have rights of the accused. We want to make sure they have a fair trial, and we want to make sure the victims have full access and participation in the trial. And so we have a lot of time frames and a lot of constitutional safeguards. So, you know, we know that we're going to be, at least we hope, that we're going to be the first of the whole system, hopefully, to start doing jury trials. It's a challenge. I'm talking to our chief judge all the time, our public defender, our administrative courts, the private defense bar. We're all talking about the need to get jury trials up and running. The good news is that come July 6th, we will start to go virtual in almost all of our courtrooms. I will tell you, our county court, our misdemeanor, and maybe I'm getting too much in the weeds, but in our county court misdemeanor level, all of those courts are virtual, open and operating, and they seem to be going very smoothly. We now have 3 in our felony divisions. We have like 20 divisions, and we're going to go, all 6 will be opening. That's the plan anyway at this point, for all kinds of other hearings, but not jury trials yet. But July 6th, we're gonna know a lot more. Also, the Supreme Court will tell us, they're guiding us, they're the ones controlling through their administrative orders, the courts. And so they basically said, we're on hold right now for all jury trials. One good thing is, and the Chief Judge and I were talking about that today with the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, the Supreme Court did select our circuit, probably because we're so collaborative and really, you know, we just all work so well together, that we're going to be the pilot for jury trials and how it's going to work for the state of Florida. So to get back to your question, I hope I gave you some, you know, some insight.
It's helpful. It's helpful.
And
I think that, yeah, hearing that, you know, jury trials are going to be complex. It's good to know that we're going to be a pilot, because that does bump us up to the top. We're running out of time. So what I want to do is give Sergio one last question, and then we're going to go to you for closing comment, and then we'll wrap up the night and say goodnight to everybody. So Sergio, and then you for closing comments.
Okay.
Ms. Fernandez Rundle, given how incredibly difficult reporting of anti-trans violence is due to misgendering and dead naming, what can you do with the help of your office to prevent that from happening?
From the underreporting?
Correct.
I
Due to
couldn't
dead
hear you.
naming and...
You were frozen there for a minute. The underreporting. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Well, you know, hopefully, one of the issues, we've talked a lot about it, different things, different ways in which we can approach that, right? Through awareness and education, through the law changing. But I'm also very hopeful that what Professor Basicki is going to find for us is going to be a guidepost for all of us. And, you know, we don't know what the findings are yet. He hasn't really shared them with us yet. We're anxiously awaiting his findings. And it's not because of him. He's been trying to get with us too. So as soon as we can sit down, maybe that'll shed a real light, a real microscope for all of us on what we need to do to make sure that we don't have victims suffering in silence. I just can't imagine feeling powerless and voiceless and uncared for and unloved and being abused and suffering in silence and feeling there's nowhere for you to go. And so we want to create a safe space for them and have them know it and have them trust it and recognize the trauma that they have been through and get them onto into a trauma, you know, treatment trauma plan, right? That trauma is going to be so deep and so broad that we want to get them on a road of healing as soon as possible. And so that's what we all have to do. And I really look forward to our friend there, the genius professor at FIU, who's going to help all of us understand this, help this particular victim population understand themselves and how we can get in and work with them. And I'll be by your side. I'll be by your side working just there with you.
So we've come to the end of the evening. I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. Really means a lot that you are always actively engaged with us. I want to thank the members of the audience that joined us. I want to encourage the members of the audience to become members of SAVE at save.lgbt/membership. And so to close the night, give us a 1 to 2 minute closing statement and we'll wrap up the evening.
Well, thank you all so much for this opportunity to talk to you tonight. It gives me an opportunity to talk about who our office is and what we've done and our accomplishments. But I also want to thank you for who you are. I've known SAVE for many years. I've had your support. We've been partners. We've dialogued. We've talked. We've created things together. And I really admire your tenacity and your devotion to your cause and your mission and those that you represent. And so I thank you for letting me be part of that throughout the years. I've benefited from your trust for many years. And I think that I would like to think that we have proven ourselves to be a leader. And that's what this office is about. It's about what are the things have we accomplished with our leadership that we're so well equipped to get accomplished. And just a couple of things that I would leave you with that I think best show how this office is a cutting edge office, how we have accomplished things that very few other offices have. For instance, we talked about the sex trafficking. That was a model for the whole country. They come here, they train here. We led that. We're the ones that led all of our stakeholders, our service providers, and created a policy institute and an infrastructure and laws. And now we have touched over 700 victims, and we just opened the first human trafficking center of its kind. That takes leadership, that takes devotion and passion. The other thing we led, think about when you talk about leadership and executive experience and having the collaborative ability to bring people to the table, Amendment 4. When we wanted to make sure that returning citizens, previously convicted felons, would have an opportunity to break free from the voter suppression that was happening to them, we were the leaders. We were the ones that said, we have Amendment 4. We supported it before it went on the ballot. We led a grand jury report that studied why it was so important to allow former convicted felons to be able to register to vote. I signed a pen, an op-ed piece that talked about that in 2018 to support it on the ballot. It went on the ballot and 63 or some odd % of Floridians voted in favor of it. And so what I did was I got the best scholars and legal scholars in our office. I worked with the public defender. I worked with the chief of the administrative courts. I worked with Desmond Mean of our FRCC. And we also worked with our senators and our legislators to put together the first in the state of Florida rocket docket. And I don't know if you remember that beautiful day, November 20th, when John Legend came to our community. He came to our circuit court so that we could begin that process. Those are the kinds of things that you can say, you know what, that office is about leadership. It is about innovation. It's about experience. It's about know-how. And it's about being equipped to deal with cases and things and people that that are unreachable sometimes. We have such a passion to help the voiceless. We really are there for victims, and we will continue to be there. And I hope as we go forward that you will continue to trust in this office that has served you. We're going into some challenging times. We're going to be going into reintegration. It's going to be a very pivotal time. You're going to need leadership and executive experience to make sure that that office, when we go full-fledged in a different way in a year and a half from now, that we have what we need to get that done. And also, all of the reforms that we're going to need to deal with the racial and ethnic disparities in all of our systems, in our criminal justice system, in our policing, and all of the different infrastructures that we have in this country. This is a time for leadership. This is a time that I would like to be there to try to accomplish the things that I believe can in many ways advance equality. And that's what I want to stand for. And that's what I want to continue to be your state attorney and continue to serve this community in the best way I know possible. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, State Attorney Rundle. And one of the things I want to do is, SAVE does a lot of work around leadership development, and Sergio did an amazing job today with doing research, being prepared, and asking questions. And so I want to prop him up just because, he did a wonderful job. And anytime our volunteers step up to do this level of engagement, it's a big thing to call out. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.